Perfect. So now we should understand what is the whole idea of lifting state up. Okay. So let's go back to the page that we used to have, and that brings us to this point in here, where you can see that we were trying to show all the listings. So we're going to use something similar for that, but before we do that, actually let me commit this demo on how to lift state up with voting, and then commit that. Yes, I guess. And is this the one? Like I always use the command line commit to stash code review, refresh. I wonder why it is so weird in here. So I guess this one to push git fetch visual periodically, I guess. And then perfect. So now I have sent that version. Okay. So now that I have that, what did I wanted to say? Oh yes. So we were doing this one. So let's go and create that. So for that, let's go and create like I like that. Actually, you know what? I'm going to say listings dot list or something, or listings list. Okay, so this is going to be a new component which I am going to create in here, this listings list or apartment listings if it is too complex. Apartment listings, or yeah, we can call it apartment listings list. And then I have to go and create this file, which I don't have. Oh, good, perfect. It allows me to do that, exactly. And then I can go and say export default, and why does it say total votes? That's so stupid. Visual Studio. And then remember, the way that you create a component in here, it's by creating a new function. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to send this data to department listings. Remember, like the data should be owned by the component that requires the data, the highest level component that requires the data. The index page for the moment doesn't require it, so I could put it in here. And then in here, basically I want to say these are my apartment listings. And ideally, I should be able to say in here, these are going to be my listings, okay? So remember, how do you get a React component to re-render? Or like basically what we learned is that we could go and create a state variable, as you can see in there, and it's going to be more consistent if we just import like React directly or use state, the hook. Remember that any hook that you create should be at the top of your page or your component. And then with this one should be listing, like drawing the listings, okay? So if I do that, then you can see here are my listings, and then I want to do something with that. So what we want to do is that, like for instance, I could go and say, if I have my listings, then draw them. But if I don't have any listings, and then I'm going to do that with this, then I'm going to show in there loading listings. And then if not, and then basically, oh yes, perfect. So if I don't have any, like if I do have some listings, basically what I want to do is a listings.map, and I'm going to do render listing, like following the same style that I approached in the other one. And then I could have like a render listing in here, or actually even better, or actually, yeah, I like this one. So basically one of the things I could do is that I could go and say this is going to be one of my listings, and I like that. So basically what I'm doing in there is that I'm going to be using another component which I need to import in here, listing from listing, and then let me go and create that other file, export default listing, and this one it's supposed to return like something like this, and don't forget to use function in there, and it should be creating like one for each one of the listings. So if I actually go and create like something like that, then it should be rendering each one of those. Okay, now key in here is that if you see, I already have connected these to the backend, and I do have these ones. So the interesting thing will be, and this is going to be an error, by the way, but for the moment, oh, and by the way, before we change that, you can go and take in here the ID, the title, and the price. And then for the moment, I can say like listing, and then I could say title, and then like the price in here or something like that. And then am I using the key? Yes, so I do have a key in here, so don't forget that. Let me refresh in here. I don't see any warnings, so we are in good shape now. So if I go and I say that the title is demo app and something, then it should be rendering, okay? And remember, this is the default value. Now, how do you get a React component to redraw? Basically, what you can do is you change the state or you change the props. So in this case, I do have a state in here, and I'm loading that directly from the API in here, and I can see that this is being printed in here, like I do get the listings data, okay? So what I could do, like the logic of it, is that I could just go and do this, and then I could just go and say, actually, let's go and set my listings to be whatever data I give me. Now, before I actually do all of that, let me go and put in here like another console log that says these are the listings that we're going to be showing. And then on top of that, I'm also going to be putting a debugger in here, okay? And I'm also going to put another debugger in here, okay? So when I refresh, then you can see that by just putting a debugger, remember, even though we are using React, this is just standard HTML and JavaScript. So if you put a debugger in your code and you have the developer tools open, which you should always have, then it's going to stop the execution at that point. So if I go to this point, then I can see I have that element, and then I can see that it's going to render the parent and it's going to return the GSX. And when it finishes, it's actually going to start again. And if I run that, it is going to render it twice because of the development, as I told you. And then what's going to happen is that it's going to execute this fetch in there. And so actually, let me go and do this again, but from here. Okay. So if I do that and I refresh, then once again, it does the first rendering, and then it creates the state, then it schedules the fetching, and then it's going asynchronously. Whenever it gets a chance, it is going to load the data from the backend, and then it does the rendering. If I go again to the next execution, then this is going to do it again because React renders twice, and it's going to like request again from the backend, which, by the way, like here, although we are not printing that is doing anything in here, do we? Yes, he's not printing anything, so it's not going to show it for the moment, but it's going to be calling that again. So what I was saying is that if going to render again, and then you can see that it actually renders the whole thing, okay? Now, what happens, and then the second debugger that I added, it's inside this fetch that you see in there. And the reason why it is running that is because I remember that I said that I wanted to schedule like the execution of that. So when you schedule that, it got the data, it converted it to JSON, and now it has the listings, but now it is going to change the state. So if I uncomment that one, and by the way, let me put a fetching all the listings. Let's say I have a get on API listings. There we go, perfect. And then here on the apartments listings, I am going to uncomment this one out, okay? So if I do that again, like first two, it renders that, and then it gets to this one. And the moment it does that, then it tries to change the state. And remember that React component is going to re-render if the state or the props change. Therefore, the moment I do this state, which is the listings, is going to change, which is going to trigger, again, the re-rendering of this page. That's why it brings me back there. Which, again, is going to trigger another request to the backend, which you can see that is going to happen in here. You can see that it gets it in there, asynchronously went and got that, and then it goes to render again. So the problem is that the render triggers the fetching of the data, which triggers the changing of the state, which triggers the rendering. So basically you get an infinite loop between those two things, and then therefore you cannot do these things like that, because even though it was going to show these things as you see in there, you actually get this infinite loop, and then the browser starts getting really angry. And if you're actually using a paid API or something in the backend, you can see that it keeps on getting like multiple doses, and you can even create like a denial of service attack. So what we need to do for that, so first let's get rid of these debuggers, and then we cannot do this thing. So what I'm going to do is that let's create reload listings or something. We are going to create a function that we call reload listings. We are going to do the fetching inside that. This is going to be an asynchronous function, so I can go and put this one asynchronous in here, because instead of using fetch and then, we want to do an await, and then I want to say if res, if not res, okay, then I print an error or something like that, and then data is going to be an await of these ones, and then I can do this. So basically it's the same one that we had before, okay? But the thing is that instead of doing this directly, I'm going to put that into another hook that is especially designed for this. So basically what this thing is called, it's called useEffect. And then what useEffect does is that it takes two parameters. First, it takes a function as a parameter, first parameter, and then an array as the second parameter. And this function is going to return something that this is going to be a console log, which is going to be fetching effect cleanup. Cleanup. So whatever this function that is returned by the function that is accepted is returning is going to be whatever cleanup you want to do. If you're, for instance, connecting to an LLM or a database and you need to clean up that, then you can do that in the effect. And then what I can do is that I'm going to put this function inside this, and then I'm going to call that function, okay? And then the second parameter of the useEffect, the second parameter is going to be the different attributes that you want to re-trigger the effect. So the beauty of the effect is that it is going, if you don't provide any parameters, it is only going to render, is going to be called once, which is probably what we want at this stage, because it's only like render the parameter once, and then, or the component once, and get the data once, and then render from that. And the beauty for that is that it's not going to trigger our infinite loop. So when I do that, now you can see that this thing reloads, and then we don't have the infinite loop, and that's it. And you can go and change it a little bit, like if you want to change parameters or something like that. For instance, for querying or something, then you can also put it in there and get it in there working. Does that make sense? So that is the useEffect. If you want to learn more about that, again, go into the documentation and you can read a little bit more in here. And then this is the setup and the dependencies, and there is a whole documentation on that, because it's one of the things that it's kind of tough to understand in React. But basically we are going to need it for understanding how to interact within the front end and the back end.